Okay, so translation filter. This is a fantastic filter. We're gonna go through what it's all about. So I think last time we covered the header translation. Header translation basically does only headers. This guy does everything else, including headers. So it'll translate content, it'll translate headers, it'll go from the request of the client to the origin service, and it'll also translate back from the origin service back to the client. The sample examples that you can do with it are you can translate from XML to JSON and back. So the example here is if your client can only support sending XML, but your origin service can only support getting JSON back or getting JSON, that's the filter for you. If you need to remove some content, for example, you want to remove some header information that you don't, or header or content information you really don't really care about on the origin service, or that you don't want to send back to the client, you can use this filter. You can also add content variables to, if you want to add variables that the client or the origin service do not provide. You can do that through Repose, and then you can also modify headers, so you can rename stuff if you so choose. It supports two types of processor libraries. Processor libraries are your XSLT processors, so parsers. The Saxon HE is the default. That's the free one. Saxon EE is the licensed version, and it has this initial support for XSLT 3.0. So if you are using 3.0, you will need Saxon EE, and then you will also need its license.
It doesn't need Xerxes?
Xerxes is HE, I think. I think that's how. So the default based on our configuration. They're two different. So, but in our XST, the enumerations are Saxon HE and Saxon EE. That's why I did not include Xerxes. Because I don't know if we took it out or we just playing around with it. But our XST does not have Xerxes as in its enumeration. So, so just going through some of the examples here. So the first one we'll look at is the configuration request. So as I mentioned, there's two ways of doing this. You can either translate from the client to the origin service, or from the origin service back to the client, or you can do both on the same request. This example is for the request. The only thing you have to do in the system model is add the filter name translation, and then in the translation configuration file, you'll have either request translation and/or response translations. And here at the bottom is kind of what the example of your request translation will look like. So you have a content type. So the element is request translation. You can have one too many elements. You can have 0 if you want, but that makes no sense. But one too many of these request translation elements. And then you can have a content type. That's a content type of the response body. In this case, it really doesn't make any sense. But the accept is what it'll match on. The request will match on. So when you pass a request, these requests were only these translations will only execute on the XML. So if you pass in JSON, nothing will happen. And then translation content type is what the translation will be after you pass it back from Repose. So in this case, it won't do anything to it, but say, for example, if you do an accept XML and translate content type JSON, it'll translate it from XML to JSON. The header itself, it won't do anything to the body. You actually will need to do that transformation yourself. So how do you do that transformation? You do that via style sheets. So style sheets can either have embedded translations or external translations. This particular example uses an external translation. It's the header XSL, and I will show this in the IDE due to the size of it. It's pasting into PowerPoint is not a good idea. So the IDs on each, so you can have one too many styles in style sheets. The IDs have to be unique. They don't have to mean anything. You just have to be unique. The href is the relative path to your XSL. So in this case, the headers XSL has to live in the same directory as a translation configuration XML. There's an attribute header true. I will touch on that in a little bit. But but let me show the code. So just gonna bounce about a bit, and so as we mentioned, here's the translation CFG. This is literally the copy paste that we've seen in the PowerPoint presentation. When I go to headers XSL, here's the actual style sheet. And as you can see, there are various templates. It's basically, if you know XPath or and XSLT, there's an awesome book on it. Just that's where, if you read through this, you basically will understand what it's doing. But just to show you, I will run through an example, and we can see what the response is, request and response is for this particular one. But basically, the thing about this filter is it's very, very powerful, and as you can see, you can do anything you want with it, translating pretty much anything to pretty much anything. Just based, the only limitation is your skills with XSLT, I would say. Okay, so going back to the presentation, the next one is the response. Again, same thing. All you need is a translation filter. And then the response will have the same exact attributes and elements as the response translation. Here we have an example of using two styles. As you can see, there are different IDs with two different values. So we're doing some remove element, and we can take a look at that in a little bit too. Going back to some of the other configuration, so on top of just translating, you can also do some awesome things just by adding a couple attributes. One of these attributes is allow doctype declaration. What it'll do is it'll allow you to embed entity declarations to all security-minded folks in the room. We do check against XXC and command injection. So if you do try to command inject, we will throw back a 400 and yell at you. So don't do it. You can also pass in an XSL engine. That is your XSL parser. Saxon HE is the default. But if you do want to support XSLT 3.0, you will need a license and just set that attribute to Saxon EE. Style sheets allow for headers and query param attributes. So as you saw in my previous example here, I had the headers equals true. What that meant is that this particular XSL will support header transformation. You can also support query parameterization. That's basically everything that goes after after question mark in the URI or in your after your host name, whatever. So example.com / and then you go to town. That's the query parameter. So question mark and then ampersand key value pairs. So you can translate that as well. We can see an example of how to do that here. Here's an example of that. So here's my translation CFG. Here's my query parameters equals true. And then if I go to my query XSL, this is the magical thing that will translate some query parameters for us. Okay, so really quickly, then going through the rest of these, on request translation, you can also match on methods. You can set it to all to match on all of them, or exclude them. It'll do the same thing. Or you can set and match on specific headers. So get, post, put, delete, patch, maybe. Whatever you want to do. Request response translation also allows you to match on response code. So you can say, I don't really care about anything that comes from the origin service that doesn't match 201, and which is created. Everything else, ignore it. So you can do some stuff on that. And then finally, by default, we do not. We only match on the very, very first translation that this thing matches on. So if you want to match on all the translation sets, meaning like if you have multiple things that you have in your translation configuration, you want to match on all of them, set the attribute value on the whole configuration to multi-match equals true, and that way you'll go through and globally match on anything you can find. Okay, so then the example of this thing, I was gonna use my try repose, but it bombed horribly. So I will just run one of the tests in our Spock test. Let me just go to one that. So to run a Saxon EE, you will need a license. If you don't have it, it will fail, obviously. But if I were to say run the request translation, should I just run it or debug it and show the request response?
Debug is good.
Debug. We will debug. So let's debug on this guy and debug. So what I'll do is I'll run through just a very generic example of the translating requests. This particular example takes in a specific sets of configs that are specified a little bit. It's in these two folders. So the common is common to all, but the one that we really want to see is the where is it? Come back. There. Want to see is the request, and within the request, here's the translation. So what it'll do is it'll take in the on post. So only for post we will do some identity and remove some elements. On post with accept content types or accept header set to XML. It'll do an identity and remove element, and then also on post. So content type XML. Am I on a different one? Sorry, I just clicked through a couple things. Let me close these screens. This is getting confusing. Okay, here we go. So since these are not this one. Okay, here we go. So this is the example that we're going to be using. So we have a post so it'll only match on post, only match for content types that are XML, and only match for accept headers that are XML. Use these two style sheets. For post, they'll only match XHTML plus XML, and accept is XML, so this is different, right? It'll use these two style sheets. And finally, these are all requests. For post, they'll match JSON, and accept XML, use these two style sheets.
Is multi-match true or false on this one?
Allowed Doctype is true, but multi-match is false.
Okay.
So
the first one it matches will be the one it uses.
Correct. And this is only for requests. And then finally, for post, for RSS, use the headers IO. So when we pass in, let me close some of this unneeded stuff. So right off the bat, given that the repose is configured to translate requests, as we saw, what we're going to do is we're only going to run through one iteration, but essentially what we're going to do is we're going to pass in an accept header set to XML, content type header set to XML, and then an XML payload, and our XML payload will look something like this. It's going to be a hyperlink with a remove me element set to test, and then a somebody element at the bottom. I'm sorry, somebody value. Will basically make sure that it contains somebody, and it'll remove the remove me part. So it only should have somebody in it. Obviously, we'll get a 200 back because it would be worthless if we failed. Okay, fingers crossed. We're going to send a request through. Okay, so here's our response. So our response, as you can see, the method is post. The response code is 200. If we go and look at the response, our sent request from the client is remove me. But then, if we look at our handling, and our handling is our internal way of showing what Repose is actually going to do, it's actually going to go in, and as you can see in our body, remove me, and now we only have a somebody. About to bring into a song. All right, so so then we do some magical things. Look at our response. This really doesn't matter because all we're gonna do is get a 200 OK back. The body's empty, and that's just the response from the origin service. As you can see, we did not touch the origin service at all. So the code is 200. It matches the response code, which is also 200, and we'll do some. We can run through that. I'll actually run through the rest of the tests down here. If you're familiar with data-driven testing, you can see that there's a bunch of conditions that we set. So if I run through all of these, I should basically get them all to pass, and I did. Yay! And that's it.